Over 454,600 student records from just the University of Nottingham dumped online. And globally, over 300 Oracle PeopleSoft instances have been completely compromised. The craziest part, the attackers didn't guess a single password to get in.
No, not a single one. This extortion group, ShinyHunters, they essentially bypassed all perimeter defenses using a critical zero-day vulnerability. It's tracked as CVE 2026-35273, if you're keeping score.
Wow.
Right, and they used it to turn trusted enterprise resource planning platforms, the very ERP systems you rely on, to run everything into massive liabilities.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into this industrialized cyber thriller. We're going to detail the target, the flaw, the break-in, the damage, and really the crucial lesson for your own data security.
Yeah, and to understand how such widespread damage occurred, we first have to look at the specific structural weakness they targeted.
Which was Oracle PeopleSoft's Environment Management Hub, right, or EM Hub.
Exactly. The vulnerability allows for unauthenticated remote code execution.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because unauthenticated remote code execution, that basically means they walked right past the front desk without an ID. But how? Because I was reading about this gadget chain concept they used.
Well, a gadget chain is when you string together small, seemingly harmless bugs to create a massive breach. You chain them together to authenticate yourself as a privileged user.
Right.
And you do that without ever needing valid credentials to start the process.
It reminds me of a bank robber. Like, instead of bringing dynamite to blow the vault door off its hinges, they just pop open a security camera in the lobby, use those existing wires to short-circuit the main lock, and just walk right in.
That is exactly it. They used the system's own architecture against it.
And because this flaw required zero authentication, the break-in wasn't, some slow manual heist.
No, it was a highly automated, industrialized extraction.
Right. Once they short-circuited that lock, they moved incredibly fast. They deployed customized Mesh Central remote control agents, but they cleverly disguised them as legitimate Microsoft Azure services.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
Wait, hold on. How do you just disguise malware as Azure? Like, if I'm an IT admin, wouldn't I notice my HR server suddenly trying to talk to an Azure service it never talks to?
That's exactly why this is so devastating. They renamed the malicious processes to match the exact names of actual Azure background tasks.
Oh, that's sneaky.
Very. So when a basic security tool scans the system, it just sees what looks like routine Microsoft updates happening. By the time anyone looks closer, the extraction has already started.
Unbelievable. And then they use something called Z-standard compression to rapidly siphon the data out.
Yes, for speed and stealth.
Yeah.
The Z-standard is incredibly fast at shrinking massive amounts of data, and they combine that with multi-threading.
Meaning they split the extraction work across multiple processors at once.
Exactly. By shrinking the files so fast and spreading the load, they kept the server's CPU from spiking. Traditional alarms that look for overworked servers never even triggered.
Wow. And then they drove the data right out the front door using outbound SMB traffic on port 445, which sounds like alphabet soup.
It does, yeah. But think of port 445 as the default highway for file sharing on Windows networks.
Okay.
They essentially loaded up the stolen data into digital delivery trucks and drove it out on a highway that most organizations just leave open and forget to monitor.
And the immediate fallout is just massive extortion demands. 68% of targeted organizations are in the higher education sector.
Which means the attackers walked away with lifetimes of permanent identity data.
Like social security number?
Yes. Financial aid details, medical histories. This is durable data that you can't just rotate like a bad password.
So this catastrophic breach really proves that relying solely on traditional perimeter defenses, firewalls and single sign-on gateways, is basically a fatal error once the attacker is actually inside.
The government definitely agrees. CISA has flagged this in their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog.
So what's the fix?
Well, immediate survival requires applying Oracle's emergency patch. If you can't do that, you need to disable EM Hub entirely and block outbound SMB traffic on port 445.
But that's just putting out the immediate fire.
It is. What's fascinating here is the ultimate lesson, which is the absolute necessity of persistent data-centric encryption and dynamic masking.
Meaning like field-level encryption, encrypting the actual columns in the database, not just the hard drive.
Precisely. If the data is encrypted at the field level, ShinyHunters goes through all the trouble of breaking into the vault, running their gadget chains, shrinking the data, but all they get is scrambled, useless text.
They broke into the vault, but the files were completely useless to them.
Exactly.
That is such a crucial distinction, because you might have your own internal perimeter totally secure, But it leaves you with a really chilling question.
Yeah, it does.
Even if you're safe, how many of the third-party vendors currently handling your sensitive data are running unpatched, unencrypted ERP systems right now?